Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to discuss all things related to digital transformation. This is a live podcast interview format that we do every week at the same time, same place. It's a podcast interview that we'll use for our podcast that's called Transformation Ground Control, and that's a weekly podcast that we publish each week that covers and dives into the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation and ERP journeys. And today's topic is lessons from an ERP implementation / upgrade. We're going to talk about some of the nuances of going through an upgrade of a new system and what some of the lessons learned are. And I'll introduce our guest here in just a moment. But before I do, a couple logistical things. One, as I mentioned, this is our part of our podcast interview or podcast episodes that you can find weekly by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So if you want to see any past episodes of this show, you can go check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can see all the past episodes we've done. And then this episode will get edited and polished, and we'll make it part of a new episode that comes out here in a couple weeks. Secondly, we're going to take live questions from the audience here today. So any questions or comments you all have, love to hear from you. We're going to start with my questions, sort of a list of questions that I've got started for us, but I'd love to hear the audience chiming in as well as we get going here. So today's topic, again, lessons from an IFS ERP implementation upgrade. Joining me today is Alex Ivkovic. Sorry, I'm trying to pronounce your name right. It's Alex Ivkovic. Alex, thanks for being here today.
Well, glad you have me, and should be interesting show. Look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you here. First time you and I've had a chance to interview in this format. But for those that don't know you, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Sure. My name's Alex Ivkovic. I'm the CIO for CDF Corporation, and we have a number of companies under that umbrella. We have ChairPack in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts. We have QuadPack in Värnamo, Sweden, and we just picked up a new company called Esperacle in Barcelona. So we're mid-market, about 500 employees total between the companies, and we deal in packaging. We make stuff out of plastic, shipping containers, all the way down to those pouches you see in the grocery store for kids' food. We make about half of those in the U.S. actually.
Okay, great. So mid-sized company, make packaging materials and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah.
Pretty
tell
much
us a little bit. I mean, how hard can it be, right?
Well, everything's simple, right?
Right. If only. But so tell us a little bit about the situation, sort of the landscape of what, this project, when you went through this ERP project. Tell us a little bit about where you were, where you're starting from, and where you're going to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been on IFS for about 17 years now. And, I know there's people listening with SAP and Oracle and different infrastructures, but IFS massively redid their product, basically. They went from an app sort of based system to an online system, cloud version. And it was basically huge changes. The upgrade process was a bit complicated, and so it was what I call a very major upgrade in the system. The user interface changed completely, just anything you could think of. So it was a process. It took us about 9 months. We learned a lot from it. We went live in November. We tend to do our major upgrades on Thanksgiving. I hate to take my people's Thanksgiving holidays away, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Just to be clear, we manufacture 24 hours a day, 363 days a year. So uptime is big for us.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of people listening are in that same boat, needing that sort of reliability and uptime with their system. How big of a change?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how big of a change was that, being on the same system for 17 years and then upgrading to a newer version of the same software? Was it more or less difficult than you thought, just the magnitude of change and the impact to the company?
It was big. It was sort of interesting. And in talking to other users and stuff, they saw kind of the same thing I did, where newer users actually had less problems than the experienced users. The change thing is always tough for people. And the system operated basically the same way. There wasn't massive functionality difference, but the user interface was completely new. One fortunate thing was they put the new user interface into the old version. So we're able to convert people over slowly into the user interface. So when we went live on the new version, it was less of a strain than we had to do the whole thing, obviously, user interface and functionality as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, and I imagine after 17 years, a lot changes with the technology, and there's a lot of nuances, I imagine, that probably add up over time as far as just the volume of changes and the.
Well, sure. And we had upgraded the old version too, obviously. We were on their latest and greatest, but it was just, this was a massive sea change in systems.
Yeah. Yeah. And while I'm getting into some of these questions with you here, Alex, I'd love to hear from the audience. Just where are you all joining from today? We tend to get a global audience here joining us. I'd love to hear what city and country you're joining from today. If you don't mind just dropping in the chat, we're watching the chat with any questions or comments you have. So that's a good place to start with, just understanding where everyone's joining from today. So thank you all for being here. And so had you been through an ERP implementation before? What was your experience with ERP projects in general prior to this upgrade that you guys just went through?
Well, I put the original IFS system in. We were on a system called Glovia, and they were still green screens. We went from green screen to a modern ERP system, and that was on version 9. So we went, or 8. So we went through 2 major upgrades of IFS, over the past 17 years.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you think about this project, what were some of the biggest surprises or lessons learned, as you went through this upgrade process?
Lessons learned. I wish that maybe we'd spent more time on the new interface. We kind of did a lot of self-training and had people go on their own. And I kind of wish maybe I don't have the staff to do it anyway, but I wish that we could have spent more time on that, because that turned into some of the biggest issues. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I wish I had planned on having some extra support here for the actual go live. That week after was pretty bad, and I just had my native staff. I probably could have brought an extra person or 2 in, and next time I certainly would. That would have been very helpful.
Right. Yeah, that's sound advice. A good lesson learned there for sure. Just turning to the audience here, just want to thank everyone who chimed in on where they're joining from today. Darian's joining from Denver. Ard is joining from Netherlands. Alcinda from South Africa. Mark from Belize. Sounds pretty. I've never been to Belize, but I've always wanted to. Fehi from Algeria, North Africa. Ivan from Croatia. Thank you all for being here today. Moses from Canada in Ontario. So thank you all for joining here today. Great to have you all, and love to hear any questions you have for Alex here related to his experience with his recent ERP project. So when you were going through this project then, and you were getting ready for the upgrade here, you said it was a 9-month project. What did the planning process look like? Like, how did you, from the time you decided that you were going to go through this upgrade and go through this project, what was it you did to get ready? Like, what were some of the high level steps or lessons you had in that planning phase of the project?
So let me take a step back for a minute, right? So when we went from 17 years ago, we went from Glovia to IFS. They hadn't upgraded in many years. And so I sat down with management, and we're a privately owned company. So it's, fairly easy to talk to, basically. And we made an agreement that we would upgrade our ERP every 3 years, come rain or shine. And that's really kind of served me well, because, a lot of people I talk to, they have to get into an argument with management. Why are we upgrading? What's it going to cost? What's it going to do for us? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay, we don't want to be back in this boat where we're 8 years behind. It's a mess, and it's almost impossible to upgrade. So they agreed to that. And we've done that consistently for the last, like I said, 17 years. We've upgraded every 3 years. So we kind of knew where we were going and when we were going to do it. So that, Thanksgiving was ordained well in advance. So we started poking around with it probably a year before then, knowing it was coming and knowing how huge of an upgrade it was. IFS already had this version 1 of this new system out at that point, so we could look at it. So we started by getting it live and playing with it and getting our data in there, and my team going in and trying different things. We invited people. We didn't open it up at that point, but we invited people from other divisions to come in and look at stuff and run stuff. The other important point, and it's one I'm very proud of, is our ERP is completely unmodified. We don't have a single modification. That
Wow.
is extremely unusual, I guess, but it is amazing when you're doing an upgrade or trying to fix something or you have a problem. During the initial upgrade way back when, I kind of looked at people and they were like, "Oh, we have to have it this way." And I'm like, I get that, but we can't do that right now. But I'll tell you what, let's just try it the native way. And you come back to me in a few months. And if you really can't get your job done or things really don't work, then we'll go ahead and we'll look at a modification. And, as I hoped, after a few months, people were so used to doing it the new way that we were able to stay away from it. So over the years, we've not had a modification. Now, IFS has a really robust custom field system and custom LUs. And we do use those. That's not considered a modification, and they're covered in upgrades. So we can put, data from another screen on one screen, and we can do some calculations, and we can do a lot of stuff inside of IFS to customize it to what people need without it being a modification. We also use some outside vendors. Cedar Bay springs to mind. Well, they're ArcWide now. And we do modify some of their stuff. So gun transactions to make the shop floor stuff go better and things like that we will customize. But the actual base ERP system is completely unmodified.
That's impressive. I mean, it's pretty rare. I mean, I know a lot of organizations and teams that strive to do no customization, but to actually achieve that is pretty impressive. It takes a huge amount of
it's been great.
discipline to be able to say.
We do some beta stuff with IFS, and they love us because we're unmodified. You know what I mean? They don't have to look at both sides. There was a question you asked before that I was starting to answer, and I went down that rabbit hole. Could you repeat that one?
I was talking about the planning process, or I was asking about the planning process.
Right. So that was our first piece, is that we moved our data in. We had people start looking at it, testing. And then my team had a discussion with how we wanted to do this. And it basically came down to getting people just used to the new interface first in the old one. And our original plan was we were going to actually shut people off from the old interface and force them to move over. That actually didn't work out because the new interface in the old version couldn't do everything, but it did get people used to it. So that was really worthwhile. The other, and this would go under lessons learned. So we do use a lot of outside partners. We use some robotic software for our accounts payable, for example, which is huge, 85% labor savings according to our accounting department. We have, shop floor guns and scanners all over the place. That's an outside vendor. We use a lot of SCADA stuff. And one of the preparation steps that I probably could have done a little bit better, lessons learned, is I didn't really push the partners to say in writing, yes, we will have this done by this date. It was a lot of, we'll do that. We've done this. Oh yeah, no problem, no problem. Well, when it got close to the implementation, there were some problems. And the partners hung us up as much as anybody. I'm not going to pick on any particular company here, but I think a good lesson to learn is if you have outside vendors, you have to pay as much or more attention to them as you do the core ERP, because they change so much stuff in going from the IFS, we called it Apps 10, to IFS Cloud, that a lot of the vendors had to re-implement their stuff and rewrite their stuff. And in some cases, they completely weren't ready. We went as long as probably a month to 6 weeks without some fairly important systems working. We had workarounds. You can always use the native stuff, but a lot of extra labor and a lot of extra time and stress.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, that's a good lesson, especially when you've got multiple vendors and someone's got to coordinate all that and kind of make sure that it's all syncing up and tying together and integrating the way it should.
And document it. Don't just take their telephone assurance that we're going to be ready. I want an email that says by this date we will have this product ready. You know what I mean? Next time I would insist on that. Yeah. So as we moved on, we did that. We had people test. I kind of have this theory about testing and users, buy it or not. I think people will test for the first week or two after you send them the email, and then they're going to go back to doing their job and not doing much of anything else. And then when they realize that the upgrade's a week or two away, they're going to panic and do the rest of their testing. The time in the middle, I just find unless you really push them, they don't do very much. I mean, people basically, a lot of people, if you're accounting, clerks, manufacturing, they want to do their job and go home. They're not interested in doing a lot of extra stuff. So I think you really have to stay on top of the testing process and realize that people have other jobs to do. You can't monopolize their time, and you have to plan it well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's a couple interesting comments I want to pull from the audience today.
Sure.
Art has a comment about Glovia. He says, "Glovia, really?" That's
Yeah.
a blast from the past for sure. I haven't heard that name in a while, but they for a while were a pretty significant player in especially
Oh,
in the
yeah,
manufacturing.
absolutely. Like I said, hadn't been upgraded. I mean, they lasted for a while after that, but we hadn't been upgraded in 8 or 10 years, and it was almost an impossible path.
Yeah. Here's a question from Scotland. This is from JH on YouTube. JH says, joining from Aberdeen, Scotland, did you find that IFS Cloud was feature complete with legacy IFS versions? So kind of getting back to the point of, or the question of how were the systems different? I mean, were there any compelling or surprising functionality gaps or anything that you noticed in the cloud version of IFS versus the legacy version you had been using for quite some time?
Oh, that's a really good question. By the time we went live, it was this past November. So the way the new IFS works, take another step back, it's an evergreen system. So they're saying no more big upgrades, and we're going to do these minor upgrades, and they number them by year. So it's 22R1, 22R2, 23R1, 23R2. And I want to say they started on 21R2, but don't quote me on that. But it's been a year or two. So by the time we went live, it was 23R2. And I would say it was mostly feature complete. I mean, there were some details, obviously. Some things are always going to be different. And a few specific things that stuck out were they took away the keyboard shortcuts. Some of them are coming back now. That drove people. It's those little details that really get to people, right? Sometimes more than the major stuff. I mean, in terms of major functionality, we could manufacture, we could ship. There was no problems there. But some details that they're actually still catching up on. But overall, I say, yeah, we were in good shape.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. Here's a follow-up question from Art. Kind of getting back to your point a moment ago, Alex, about you're saying how the employees would start and then finish pretty intense, and then there's that gap in the middle where there wasn't a lot going on, or there wasn't as much work happening potentially. So the question from Art on LinkedIn is, how do you push during a long period? So how do you sustain that momentum and keep things moving along, given that dynamic that you were talking about?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think that you can do a formal process and an informal process. So, I told you we have different companies spread all over. So when I'm visiting, I'll, pop into various managers' offices that I know are key, and we'll just talk. Hey, how's your testing going? How's it go? How are you doing? We haven't done anything lately. That upgrade's coming, and when a week before the upgrade, I only have X amount of staff. So if you have problems, you're going to have problems. And in some cases, you have to get pretty serious about it. And, oh, we don't have time. We haven't tested. Well, okay, but you need to understand something. The day we go live, if there's problems, first we're going to focus on the people that did test and getting functionality for the company working. And if that means you have to go 4 or 5 days without getting help, I mean, I'm sorry, we don't want to torture you, but that may be how it is. If you could test ahead of time and we can find these problems, you're really doing yourself a lot of good. And I think you can send out all the emails you want, but I think that face-to-face, talking to people and letting them know that what's going to happen. And like I said, I mean, you got to be a little bit careful with that because that could sound almost threatening. You know what I mean? But you have to make people understand what's going to happen in a clear way. And certainly it did happen in a few cases where people didn't test and now they were shocked that things didn't work. And I'm sorry, but what can I do? And then the other thing is to document it. So if you look at something like, I don't know, a customer order to manufacturing, we'd send out emails that say, okay, customer service, just put these orders into the new system, and then send it on to the planners and say, okay, can you plan them in the system? Send it to manufacturing. Okay, can you guys pretend that you're running these orders? And then send it to shipping and say, okay, can you guys pretend you're shipping these orders? So by kind of directing the process from end to end, we could kind of push them to test a little bit. To accounting, can you please test your month close process? For all the different companies.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like a good process. And James on YouTube says, especially with the global project, workshops were mandatory for us. So I imagine the more complex, the more dispersed you are, the more disparate the processes are, the more siloed you are, the more those global workshops become
Mhm.
pretty important to look at
Yeah.
those end
Um,
processes.
one of my issues is, as I say, we cover 4 or 5 different companies, and they're all very different. And so, if I was going to take the say customer service from each company, I can't really put them into one workshop. I have to have 4 of them because they're so different that it just wouldn't be smooth. One is going to go off in one direction, the other in another. So that's tough. We did things a little bit different when I was talking about the new interface. So what we did is we gathered together training documentation and videos, etc. And we told people, okay, we're going to give you a week and we want you to study this stuff. And then the next week, the IT team is going to be available for some 2-hour meetings. You're welcome to come in, ask whatever questions you have, let us know whatever problems you have. So we tried it like that. It worked out okay. I mean, you know, a formal workshop where you make people sit in it for an hour, we didn't really do that, but I can see where it makes a lot of sense depending on your structure and your organization.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got it. That's a good point. You've got to sort of be true to who you are, and you've got to fit sort of your culture and your style as a company, and you're going to have to come up with a different approach, I imagine, based on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything we're talking about is going to be different. I mean, it flows from the top down. How does the management work? At some companies, if you threatened that everyone had to sit in a 2-hour workshop, there'd be mutiny. And other companies, they'd be like, yeah, okay, that's normal for us. But
Right.
are there some places where I
Now,
think that could have
now,
helped us? Absolutely.
yeah. Now, what about from a change management perspective? This is from Alcinda on LinkedIn. Alcinda asks, would you say the need for change management is less important in the upgrade of an ERP system than when changing or replacing the entire system?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, the core system worked the same. It was the interface people were dealing with. There were some changes, and then a lot of crazy stuff. Like for some reason, they renamed database fields. So, but much less change management. If you were bringing in a new ERP system, that's going to be massive. I'm going to assume that the processes are going to change, and that is going to call for some serious change management. So, yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a moment ago, just a second ago, Alex, you mentioned how, depending on you type of company you are, you might structure the team different, or you might have just different approaches. How did you guys structure the project team, at least at a high level?
Um, we sort of didn't. I mean, I have my team, of IT people, and then we have these different companies, and we just sort of approached them singly. We didn't have a single project team. Now, I think remember that I said we're mid-market, 500 employees, and I think one of the important things I've always believed is someone's got to be in charge. So if you had a problem with the ERP upgrade, you can come see me, and I will either have the answer or know how to get it. I've seen, the similar things that were run by committee and no one really was in charge and no one really was responsible. And it's not really a good thing, in my opinion. Now, I understand that a company with 10,000 employees is going to have to structure it differently than a company with 500. That's a different ballgame.
Right. Yeah. So it's a bit more organic. It sounds like, as far as the way you structured the team and kind of worked with the different business units
Yeah, it
within.
was, it was more of a flow. I mean, if we were a 10,000 employee company, I mean, I would obviously you'd have to have more of a team and people in charge, but I think I would still make sure that there was somebody that was specific to each area. So I'd say, okay, you're in charge of the customer service aspect of this implementation, soup to nuts. That's your responsibility. Um, you're in charge of vendor management. All these things, but I think it's just always really important to have someone where the buck stops and you can say, okay, this was your area. What's going on with it? Because a lot of times, it's difficult to find someone that can answer a question, and it shouldn't be. How's this going? What's the problem? What are you seeing? You need a continuous pulse on that, or your implementation is going to fall behind and fall through the cracks.
Right. Here's another follow question here on LinkedIn. What were the main management challenges you faced during the ERP implementation? How did you overcome them? Good
The
question.
main management challenges, once again, just getting people to do the testing and trying to get it done. It's hard to, like I said. I mean, we can talk about a lot of stuff, but in the end, your average user wants to do their job and go home. And if you add too much to their plate, and I have this same talk with management sometimes about other stuff. We can get off of ERP for a minute, and they'll have some great, exciting new project but it's going to take X amount of hours. And I always sort of mention, at least, that look, people have X amount of hours in the day. Um, Even if it's something really good, it still takes time, and you have to be respectful of people's time. So you have to give them enough time to do their testing in a realistic way, and you have to whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's easy for us as leaders to say, well, we'll just give them a little extra work, and how hard can it be? And that it doesn't always.
100%, right? Because you got to remember something. You're not the only one doing that. If you have, HR wants some little thing, accounting wants some little thing, manufacturing wants another little thing. By the time you head up all the little things, it's a half-time job, and that's how you're going to cause stress. So you have to figure. I mean, I've heard it said, what was told to us in initial implementation was you should count on it taking 50 for the people that are really in charge of departments. You should count on it taking maybe 6 months of 50% of their time. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And you better figure out how that's going to happen. And you better convince people that they need to do that. And once again, I think a lot of ERP implementation issues are caused by people just not planning on how much time it's going to take and what that takes out of someone's day, remembering that their primary responsibility has to come first. If we can't put in the customer orders, all the ERP system and testing in the world is not going to help us. If we're not manufacturing, it's not going to help us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's I think a lot of times leaders underestimate the amount of effort that some of these projects take. You talk about all these little things, little requests that people have that start to add up, and chances are pretty high you're not taking away their day-to-day responsibility. You're just adding to their plates, and so you've got to be
Right.
mindful.
We've all heard a boss say to us, "Oh, how long will that take? 20 minutes?"
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And you're like, "No, actually, about a day and a half. So try again." Right.
right.
So
Yeah,
I think when you're trying to implement or upgrade or whatever an ERP system, you have to be respectful to the people doing the testing and the implementation, and make sure that your requests are reasonable.
yeah, yeah. Given that you took this more of sort of fluid approach to the planning and the actual upgrade itself, did you find that it was a little bit more difficult to anticipate some of the impacts, as far as workload and potential capacity constraints in the project? Or how did you navigate that, given that you had this sort of fluid, organic approach to the project?
Just case by case. I mean, just staying on top of everybody and frequent communication is really the key, right? Fortunately, we didn't run into areas that were overwhelming. They just said, we can't do this. We don't have time. A little bit of grumbling here and there, but overall, I'd say it went fairly smoothly. And like I said, I would credit communication. You have to stay in touch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's more than just like you said earlier, it's more than just a couple emails here and there. You've got to find the best way to get the message across to the audience. What about working with technical implementers? This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian asks, what lessons did you have working with IFS technical implementers along the way?
We use the IFS has a North American upgrade team that I've dealt with before, so I know them really well, and they were great. One of the things about the IFS upgrade was they completely changed the technical back end of how upgrades work. Previously, basically, they would send me a script and a file, and it would run for 12 hours, and we'd have to do maybe a database upgrade and some things like that. Now, they've made it so you're much more in control of your upgrade environment, which is a plus, but it also it takes a lot more technical work that we weren't doing previously, and no one on my team had ever done. I spent many a night studying the new upgrade system and trying to figure out how it worked exactly. And there's an IFS World Conference coming up in October in Orlando, and I'm actually going to take a class in it just to understand it a little bit better. So it's
Mm,
interesting. I don't know how to describe it. It's just a whole different back end where previously they were doing all the work and now you're doing all the work.
right. Right. And along those same lines, kind of getting into the technical implementer thread. This is from Marcel on LinkedIn. Marcel says, "How mature do you consider the IFS partner ecosystem? As an IFS customer, are you finding it easy to find the top talent slash IFS partner to be able to manage the implementation successfully?"
Yeah, IFS has grown massively. And Eric, I know you track the market, so I think you can probably vouch for that.
Yeah.
And previously, they weren't really big on using the partner infrastructure so much. Now they've expanded. They realized they couldn't organically grow unless they really started to get some help from outside partners. And we have some partners we've used for many years that we like quite a bit. I find them invaluable. They work well with us. I think it's still shaking out a bit. There's a lot of sales and purchasing. Like there's a fairly large partner called ArcWide now that bought one of our vendors, Cedar Bay, that we've used for many years. So I think it's still shaking out a bit. But overall, I'd rate it pretty high. We were successful using them, and I'm still successful. So we're doing one of those minor upgrades I talked about. We're in the process now, and partners helping me with the technical stuff that was some of the issues. So pretty well.
Right. Good. So what were some of the other challenges? Any other challenges we haven't talked about so far, as far as just challenges or surprises you had along the way as you're going through this upgrade project?
No, the one thing I mentioned is that the new user thing I found was interesting, where people we just hired were fine with it, and people who had been here a long time were really had a problem. Some of the database stuff, and one question my boss always asked me that I've never been able to answer: Why is printing always the biggest problem? Don't know why. Every
Like
ERP implementation or upgrade, printing fails, and reporting and printing are always a nightmare.
like printing labels, you mean, like labels and things
No,
like that,
like
or
reports and everything else,
oh,
just printing in ERP always seems to be a huge issue. It's just clunky. But overall, I mean, I don't nothing shocked me or surprised me. Everything went kind of like we planned, with the usual hiccups along the road. And if you talk for a minute, maybe about a little bit of upgrade philosophy. And one of my core beliefs is that whether it's an implementation or an upgrade, the more fancy stuff, the more you try to add or change processes, the less successful it goes. So when I'm planning an upgrade, you had asked about the planning process, right? All I want to do on that upgrade day is get everybody's process back to where it was on the old version. If they can come in and just do their job the same way with no improvements at all, I'm perfectly happy. And I know sometimes that's a political issue because you go to your board or your management and you're like, oh, we're going to get this new system or upgrade and it's going to have all this cool new stuff and they want to see it. But the way I look at it is this: you only have X amount of staff and X amount of money and X amount of time. If you can get people back to their baseline, right? And then once that's calmed down and everything's running well, now you take your staff and you focus on different things and you make improvements and bring in some of these new systems. Now your team can focus on that. They're not being screamed at about 1,000 other tickets from the upgrade process. Um, the people are used to the new system. They can do a better job of implementing. They'll see how it works and maybe some of the advantages. So I'm just a big believer in the simplest upgrade or implementation possible. Get it done, get them on the new system, and now take your time and do a better job of implementing these improvements and these fixes. And like re-implementation is a dirty word to me. I wouldn't do that in a million years. Let's get it upgraded. Then let's start re-implementing. Even if you want to re-implement, say, your customer service flow or something, do it after. Why make it too tough? The other big advantage is when you have a problem, if you've re-implemented or you're making all these wholesale changes, now you don't know where the problem's from. Is it from the upgrade or is it from the re-implementation? So for all those reasons, I think the simpler you keep it, the better your chance of success. Whether that's an implementation or a re-implementation, keep it simple.
mm, right. Yeah, it's good advice. The simpler you can make it, the better. There's already enough complexity as there is in these sorts of projects, so why make it
Yeah.
more difficult than it needs to be? So was there, and I guess this question, it sort of relates to what you were saying earlier about the discipline you had to have to not do customization and to use the software off the shelf out of the box the way it was built. But was that as sort of a culture shock to employees, or did you see any aspects of this upgrade process that was a culture shock, or was it difficult for you? You talked about some of the tenured employees that maybe a little bit more difficulty adjusting. But how did you maybe just talk a little bit about the people impact and how you navigated the whole people
Mhm.
side of change during this?
It was directly related to how much testing they did ahead of time. I
Hmm.
mean, I could tell you exactly which departments tested how much. Like I have 3 different accounting departments, and I can tell you the ones that really got into it and knew everything, the ones that said, "We'll fix it later." And some people have the philosophy, if it breaks, they'll have to fix it for us. We'll do it later. But you could really tell who did the testing and who did the learning and who decided not to. And their satisfaction afterwards was directly related to that. The ones that went with the process and did the testing, I think, made it through pretty easy. There was a lot of grumbling from some people that didn't do that, and so my boss would come to me and he'd say, "Oh, so and so is complaining about the upgrade." I'm like, "How much testing did they do?" "Well, not much." "Well, what can I? You know what I mean?"
Right.
Um, so it's very related to that. It's like anything else. Preparation, planning, testing are key, and your satisfaction on the other side is going to be directly related to how much of that you do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. And I think a lot of times people forget to recognize that the testing process is about testing the software. Of course, it's testing technology, testing processes, but it's also about getting people comfortable. It's getting your
100%.
users to involve, like getting them to own this and to sign off on things. I mean, you're sort of getting the broader organization involved. So you're not just, the IT guy pushing this change to the business.
Yeah, and I try to train my staff now. I mean, even though it doesn't seem directly technical related, soft skills will take you a long way in getting people to do stuff. People appreciate if you walk into their office, have a cup of coffee, relax, talk to them about the project a little bit in ways they can understand. That can really help you along. It can really help your project. People don't necessarily want to be hit with a bunch of techno babble, right? Well, we're going to buy
Right.
this because and just having those soft skills, I think, is really helpful in making your project successful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It buys you a lot of, you have a lot more margin for error, when you've got the people involvement and commitment, that sort of thing.
Sure.
Did
You know
you
what?
did you ever have a time where you felt like it was, this is turning into sort of an IT thing, and it's harder for us to get the business involved, and especially with the workloads that people are dealing with and that sort of thing. Was that ever a challenge, or did you struggle with that at all through the process?
Oh yeah. I mean, I always wish for more, right?
Right.
There were times where I felt like it's just us and I'm going, oh, this is just not going to go well. People aren't doing enough, and it's going to hurt. But in the end, it worked pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. Good deal. So if you could go back and do this upgrade over again, you get a mulligan here. You get to start over,
Okay.
do it better. What are a couple things you might change or do differently if you could?
I probably would have got a little bit more help. My IFS specialist was overwhelmed. So I probably would have, maybe for 3, 4 weeks before the upgrade, went to one of the partners that was asked about, and they have some very good people. And I think I would have made and some arrangements to have some help from possibly 3 or 4 weeks before upgrade day to maybe 2, 3 weeks after. I think that would have been really helpful. I would have brought in some temporary help. That's probably the biggest lesson I learned. I'm kind of a go it alone kind of person. I don't really like to pay people to come in, but if I have to, I will. And I think that would have been helpful. And I did do a post mortem, with management, and they were like, "Yeah, we would have paid for that. That would have been good."
Yeah. 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 That's good. And you mentioned before too, that go live support piece of it. You talked about that too, about how having more support especially at the time of go live or at the time of the code over. That seemed to be another lesson that you were talking about too.
You know what's an interesting thing about that? So we went live on Thanksgiving Thursday here in the U.S. for people overseas, right? It's one of the biggest holidays of the year here in the United States, just to set the stage for overseas. Everything's closed. And the companies were closed on the Friday, and then we had the normal weekend shift starting up in manufacturing. And we made it through Monday, and very few complaints. Everybody kind of made it through Monday without a problem. And then Tuesday, it hit the fan. That's when the tickets just started to pour in. We can't do this, we can't do that. But it was interesting. We had that 24 hours of sort of breathing downtime. You know what I mean? And then it just
Yeah.
went crazy. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah. Now, what about well, let me get to a couple of comments here actually before I get to this
Sure.
question. But this is from James on YouTube. James has a comment that says, "Same here. There's a fine line between handling the migration internally and saving money versus handing it off to consultants."
Yeah, and it's not only, let's be clear, it's not only just saving money, although that's certainly an aspect of it, but it's also, so you bring a consultant in, now you have to bring them up to speed. They have to be trained. They may or may not work the way you're used to. You know, a consultant can also be a little disruptive. So I think you have to carefully choose and plan how you want to do that. But yes, absolutely, it's a decision. Like I said, it's not black and white, but you know, he asked me what I would do different. I think that's one thing I would have considered doing differently.
Right. Here's a really good question that I'm curious to hear your knee-jerk reaction to this, Alex. But this is from Art on LinkedIn. Art says, "What if there are problems and the project is led by an ambitious program manager who's rewarded with a bonus bound to the deadline of implementation only?" So,
I'd say your structure is wrong. If you have, they should be responsible. They should report to management. Okay, this is going to take longer because of X, Y, or Z, and they should be able to back that up and explain it. But to make them financially responsible, you're looking for a problem in my book. I'm assuming this is an internal employee. If this is an external consulting firm, it's a different story. There has to be boundaries because they have no motivation. But if this is your internal employee and his bonus is going to be based on getting this done in time, I wouldn't go for that. I wouldn't
yeah,
agree to that, and that would scare the hell out of me, quite frankly. They should be motivated because they want to do the right thing for their company. And if I can go to management and say, look, we're just not ready, we need an extra month, if they can explain it and say why it happened and have a sit down discussion about it, then that should be okay without them getting kicked in the pocketbook.
yeah, yeah. It's a good point. I mean, sometimes implementing on time is not the best thing. I mean, I know we all, as project managers, the project manager and all of us says, no, you should implement on time. You should implement on budget. Of course, we want to, we strive to that, but there are times where it makes a lot more sense to delay a go live or cutover and get it right because the impact and the cost is so much less severe.
100%. Now, I think what you have to watch out for is sometimes it becomes too easy to delay.
Yeah.
You know, you really have to be motivated and driven that you want to hit that date. And you're going to look at it as a personal failure if you don't hit that date. And I certainly do, man. If I missed that date, because we were close on a few things, there were a couple things I wasn't happy about. But I would have looked at that as a personal failure, and they don't need to hit me in the pocketbook. Management would have known how I felt. And I think that should be all the motivation you need.
Yeah. And I think that, you have to look at, you're kind of getting into strategy and structure here with the project, but, sometimes I think teams and leadership within organizations, they mean well. They say, hey, what if we want to go live on time? So what if we give someone an incentive to hit a go live date? I mean, it sounds reasonable enough, right? But if you really peel back
In
and
that sense,
understand,
it
like,
does.
but it could drive the wrong behavior. Like, to your point, if it could be that, you don't want to necessarily overly motivate someone to hit a date, potentially arbitrary date too, by the way.
Right, because people are going to spend that money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And oh, well, we can't do this. You know, do we still want to go live? Well, we have to go live. We have no choice.
Yeah.
We had a problem in that we couldn't get Crystal reports running, and that's a very major part of our operation. It's used for operational reporting and even things like shipping paperwork and customer order acknowledgments and everything else. We're having real problems with it. And on the weekend before go live, I literally spent 8 hours on the phone with IFS technical support in Sri Lanka. And it turned out to be one setting wrong in a single file that caused the whole issue. It had to do with allowed IP addresses for the print server, something stupid. But we found it. But if that hadn't have been fixed, I would have had to seriously consider pushing off, because we wouldn't have been able to print order acknowledgments. We wouldn't have been able to do shipping paperwork. It would have been a really big problem. So,
Yeah, that's well, and, another thing too. There's also the incentives that teams sometimes create. They think they want to have a vendor come in at a fixed bid. Let's do a fixed bid, and that way we can contain our costs. That's another thing that just sort of came to mind as you were describing that. Sort of
sure.
the incentives sort of gets a little bit screwed up, because now you've incentivized your partner to implement as fast as possible and as cheaply as possible. And that's not always the right answer either. So it's sort of like you got to figure out what these unintended consequences are of some of the decisions you make when you're structuring a team or building incentives or trying to motivate a team.
Right. And that's what would worry me. So if we used an outside vendor for the upgrade, right? And so you've got a big penalty clause in there or a big bonus clause if they make a certain date, it's going to be hard for the lower level employees of that vendor, whoever that is, to be able to go to their management and say, guys, we got a problem here. This isn't going to work. Yeah. So that's, I think it's something to be concerned about. I don't, ERP is so critical to a company. I can see using an outside vendor to do work, and maybe it's just me, but I have a hard time completely turning something over to an outside vendor without someone inside the company really being responsible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Here's a question from Ellis on LinkedIn. Ellis asks, did you look into independent IFS freelancers or just at the IFS partner staff?
I honestly did not. It's not something that ever crossed my, I don't even know how I'd find them on LinkedIn maybe, but I'm not against it. I just didn't occur to me.
Yeah. Here's a question on LinkedIn. From a top management perspective, how did the leadership team contribute to the ERP implementation process, and what role did they play in driving the project success?
I am a very fortunate person in a lot of ways. And like I said, we're a privately owned company. It's the Sullivan family, and they are great. They give me a lot of support. They let me do what I need to do. They pretty much stay out of the way. But if I need something, they're right there for me. But I realize I'm a lucky guy. That's not the truth anywhere. They, whatever I asked them to do, they would do. And that's very helpful. So, they knew that when I was saying we need to do this testing, it was also coming from them. And it was something important to the company, and they supported that.
Yeah. So you had that support from the ownership level on down.
100%. And they would come down sometimes and ask some tough questions like, I don't know, but in the end, they're very supportive. And I've always actually really appreciated where I work because of that. It's a good atmosphere.
What about your peers? The other C-level, business leaders within the company. Were they as supportive, or did you feel that same level of support, or did you have any pushback on the project?
Everybody's great. There was nobody that really stood in our way or caused problems. Once again, you get back to the testing. So some people whose departments, just felt like they didn't have time, or they felt overwhelmed with other stuff, they obviously weren't too pleased. But in the end, everyone knew what was going to happen, and they were going to have to either, do it or get out of the way.
Right. Yeah. Well, I suppose that all starts at the top, when your owners and your top people are saying, hey, this is important. We're going to invest in this. We're going to support it.
Right. Because they had no path. It's not like they could go to the owners and say, well, we're just not ready for this. We don't have time. We're not going to do it. That would not be a good career move for them. You know what I mean? And it's fortunate. So we've done like some beta testing for IFS on various products, their CRM system. We've done some robotic stuff with them that's fairly well known on the internet. And I think one of the reasons is, first of all, we have the no modifications. That's helpful. But the other thing is the management will allow me to do, anything reasonable, because they know I'm looking out for the company first. So if IFS calls and they want to beta test something, we don't have to go through a board and 25 hoops. We can just kind of agree to to do something, and we can be flexible about it. And I think that's it's really paid off for us over the years.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So when you think back at this project and you're sort of reflecting on the project and you're giving other CIOs, other business leaders advice on how to handle their ERP upgrade or their re-implementation, their full implementation, whatever it is, what are the top 2 to 3 keys to success or the top 2 to 3 takeaways you'd leave with anyone that's about to go through this similar process?
My number one would be what we talked about. Keep it simple. Try to implement back to baseline and then grow from there. You'll be much happier. Modifications are evil. Stay away from those. And watch the soft skills. If you can get people with you and understanding and stuff, your implementation is going to be more successful than if you just throw a bunch of technical stuff and some manuals at them. Get people on your side, make them want to help you.
Yeah. And make them part of the solution. And, you talk about testing.
100%. Yeah. And that's going to, once again, that's going to look very different in a company with 500 people versus 10,000. But I think even in a company with 10,000, you can make it personal to some extent. Not, I can't sit down with 10,000 employees and have an hour-long meeting with each one, but, you can be seen, you can be heard, you can be seen to be supportive. And, there's 2 different kinds of help desk systems. There's help desk systems where you're left with the feeling that they really want to help you solve your problem. And there's help desk systems where you're really left with the feeling that they have metrics to hit. And by sending this email to you on time, they've now hit their metric and they really don't give a darn after that, right? And I think if you're looked at as the first one, where really your issue is to solve people's problems versus you're dogmatic, here's my numbers, I just have to report to management that I solved X amount of problems in X amount of time and everyone's happy, not so much. And it's those users, it's the end users that are really going to make or break you in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the questions I saw scrolling by was someone asked about key users. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that surprised me a little bit was you can't always identify key users by how you think they're going to be. So we had in one of the companies, we had a customer service person that was newly hired. He'd been there like a month. And he turned out to be a huge asset. He loved testing everything and working with us to make it done. But I didn't even know the guy's name when we started. And, there are other people who've been there for years that I would have thought, oh, they're going to be involved in this. And they just really weren't that interested. So key users, yes, but give everyone a chance to become one. I think that would pay.
Right. Yeah. That's sound advice, and appreciate being here today. This is really good stuff, Alex. Appreciate your sharing your insights, and especially while it's so fresh in your mind, having just recently gone through this, and great stuff you've shared with us here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I appreciated all the questions. I thought they were great.
Yeah, and, great stuff from the audience. So thank you to the audience for always asking the great questions, because the audience always thinks of stuff that I wouldn't have thought of asking. So it's really good.
I didn't think of some of it either. I will grant you that.
Well, good. Well, again, we'll take this interview. We'll add some more content to it. We'll edit it, and we'll make it part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released here in a couple of weeks. So be sure to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you're interested in that podcast, you can go listen to or watch past episodes. We do these live interviews as part of that podcast series every Tuesday, same time and place, wherever you're listening or watching here today. We'll do it again next week. And we're always covering different topics related to digital transformations with different guests. So thank you for joining here today. Want to thank everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.